Well, the recent economic collapse is on record as the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And in spite of the fact that popular wisdom said that a collapse of this proportion could never happen, it did. So it leaves many of us asking, how could things go so wrong so quickly? In the era of a clear focus on risk management and with major compliance initiatives like Sarbanes-Oxley and Basel II, how can we possibly have this type of collapse? So is risk management dead, or is it just in need of an overhaul? And can new risk measures get us out of this mess? And can they help prevent another economic catastrophe in the future? Well, fortunately, we have an expert with us today who can help us understand what happened and offer some suggestions about how we can prepare our businesses for moving forward. Joining us from our New York studio is Bill Sharon. Bill is the CEO and founder of Strategic Operational Risk Management Solutions, or SORMS. He's a noted lecturer and consultant focusing on financial management and risk topics. In his 25 years of experience in the financial services and marketing and communications industries, he's held a variety of C-level positions and consultancies. Bill, welcome.
Sue, hi. It's nice to be here.
So let's get right down to it. What did happen? How was it possible for such a huge collapse to occur when we have a period here where risk management and compliance issues were really such a point of emphasis?
Well, on a systemic level, we really have three components that we need to look at. The first is a debt-based monetary system. That's a system in which you can't create money unless you create a debt. The second one is that since 1971, we've had a fiat currency. That means we've had a currency that's not backed by gold or silver or any other precious metal, which means that you can create as much money as you want. And the third element really is that for the last 35 years, we've removed every regulation and constraint on the marketplace. Now, when you drop that down to the enterprise level or the company level, what happens is that the means of exchange, that is to say money or profit, has become much more important than what we in fact exchange, which is goods and services. So in a situation like that, you have money as being one of many metrics that you measure a company by, to being the only metric, and in some cases actually the product of the company. Buy our stock because we make money. When you inject risk management into that kind of a scenario, it's very much focused on how can we not lose the profit? How can we maintain our stock price and our quarterly earnings? And when that is the only measure, the only context for risk in a company, you get into a very defensive, negative position, and you tend not to look at the risks that need to be embraced in order to be successful.
Okay, so it sounds like you're suggesting that we really need to shift to a new mindset around risk management where we sort of focus on what could go right as opposed to what could go wrong. So how do we do this? And, is it going to be possible to shift these gears in a timely fashion to really make a difference?
Well, it comes really down to leadership and strategy. I mean, if you go into most companies today and you ask mid-level managers or even some senior managers what the strategy of the company is, they probably don't know. And it's really not their fault because they probably haven't been told. I find that strategies tend to be kept in very small groups and not communicated. So the first thing you need to do is have a coherent strategy and communicate it. That puts you in a position then to ask your organization what risk needs to be embraced for us to achieve our strategy. What has to go right? And quite frankly, that's a shorter list than the list of everything can go wrong. Let me give you two examples quickly of companies that operate that way. It's a company called Interface Carpet. It's been around for some time. It's run by a guy named Ray Anderson. And in the early 90s, when he was preparing for a stockholders meeting, somebody came in and said, "Ray, you got to talk about sustainability." And he said, "Okay, what is that?" Didn't really know the meaning of the word. He educated himself about how his product was made, and he was astonished at the waste and the environmental damage. So in the early 90s, let's remember that date, he decided he was going to make his company 100% sustainable. Now, he's almost there. But in the meantime, Interface Carpet has a 40% market share, and they made boatloads of money. The other company I would suggest is Apple Computers. A lot of us either don't know or forget that the iPhone was delayed in coming to market, some say, by over a year. And the reason was because it did not meet the design criteria and the functionality criteria of that company. So they forfeited revenue in the short term, and now they've got really the model that everybody else is compared to when they come out with a phone. So it's possible to shift gears. It's possible to do it quickly. It does take courage, leadership, and a strategy.
Okay, I think those are good words for many things, but let's talk a little bit about compliance here. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I think many people assumed that compliance initiatives like SOX and Basel II were sort of risk-oriented measures that would really protect us. So what exactly did we achieve with those compliance initiatives when you look at what's been happening since then? And are future compliance initiatives really going to help us manage risk more effectively?
Well, let's remember that Sarbanes-Oxley and Basel II are really designed for systemic risk. That is to say, they're designed for you and me and anybody who wants to invest in a company. Lots of organizations have decided that they are sufficient to manage risk internally. They're not meant for that, and they can't do that. Now, the question is, why weren't they effective? Well, Sarbanes-Oxley was really about transparency in the financial process and having controls in the financial process. And it should have given us a hint that it took hundreds of millions of dollars in several years for a company to become compliant with what one would assume is sort of basic business practice. But nevertheless, in any regulatory implementation, there's always a period of time when people basically comply, and then somebody tries to move the goalpost a little. And when they do that, they either are caught or they get away with it for a bit. In this case, basically what happened is people left the arena and went and built a 6,000-acre theme park. The issue here really, and let me just give you some quick numbers. In September of last year, when TARP was being voted down by the House, the total value of the New York Stock Exchange equities was $20 trillion. That's a lot of money. But if you looked at the total value of derivatives globally, it was anywhere between $750 and $1,300 trillion in an unregulated market. So Sarbanes-Oxley is really kind of a sideshow when you've got that kind of influence on our monetary system.
Okay, you know, I've seen some of your recent blog postings, and I know you think there's a basic problem with the way we've done company valuations. And I think I've heard you say that we emphasize the likelihood of default as being the gold standard of valuation rather than likelihood of doing well. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've all heard this term CDS. It's something called a credit default swap. And it's essentially an insurance policy. You buy a bond at 10%. You're not quite sure if you're going to get paid. You go in the market and you buy a CDS at, say, the equivalent of 2%. So you got a guaranteed 8%. And it's a hedging technique that's been around for a long time. But we've securitized CDSs. So now, again, if you go back to that date in the end of September, you had about $65 trillion in CDSs insuring $5 trillion of bonds, a 12-to-1 ratio. It'd be like you and I knowing a guy named Frank, who's a great guy, but a terrible driver, and we hear he buys a car. So we get 10 of our friends, and we get on the cell phone, we all buy insurance contracts on Frank's car. And lo and behold, eventually he smashes it up, walks away because we like Frank. But he gets a new car, and we all get new cars. Well, obviously, that's not sustainable. But the other thing that I discovered as I was looking into this is that the CDS is really the gold standard in valuing a company. So what are we looking at here? The value of a CDS goes up if the company is more likely to fail. And when we value companies based on the likelihood of failure, that has a very corrosive effect in terms of how those companies behave and how we are actually determining value in the marketplace, which is what's the likelihood that they'll fail rather than the possibility that they'll succeed.
So we really have sort of in the past sort of turned everything opposite to the way it should be then.
Yeah, one would think.
Okay. Well, I know we've heard a lot about the stress testing recently undertaken to provide the future validity of our major banks and our financial institutions who still aren't doing too well. Is this merely more of the same, or does it indicate a new, more realistic direction with respect to risk?
Well, look, I feel constrained to say that, I'm an optimistic guy. I think we're going to come through this and we will have a better monetary system and we will have better businesses. But the stress tests seem to me to be a badly designed PR effort. I mean, we don't really know the internal machinations of how things were figured out. We understand what amounts of money various banks needed to raise, and we only know a few of the parameters, but one of them is the unemployment rate. And you reported earlier in the broadcast that it's at 9.6%. The parameter in the stress test was 10.4%. Now, some people would say the actual unemployment rate is really 16.5% because we stop counting people when their benefits run out. We say they're not looking for work anymore, which I don't know how we know that that's true, but if you add those people back in, it's 16.5%. So the stress of 10.4% wasn't enough stress. And, if you talk to Nouriel Roubini, he basically says we've got another 2.3 million of write-downs coming.